I always thought I was building a life for us. Turns out, I was just building a life for her to share with someone else. For 5 years, I worked 60-hour weeks at Wilson & Marks Engineering, climbing from junior engineer to project lead through sheer determination and countless late nights. The money was good, great, even. We bought a beautiful 3-bedroom house in a neighborhood we couldn't have dreamed of affording when we first married. We took vacations to places like Costa Rica and Italy. Kate never had to worry about our finances, and I took pride in that. Yes, I missed dinners sometimes. Yes, there were weekends when proposals were due, and I'd camp out in my home office instead of joining Kate for whatever she'd planned. But I always thought she understood. This was temporary. This was for us. For our future. I barely see you anymore, Alex, she'd say, leaning against the doorframe of my office, arms crossed. I know, I'm sorry, I'd reply, barely looking up from my laptop. Just let me finish this section, and I'll be right out. But often, by the time I emerged, she'd already gone to bed, leaving a plate of cold food in the microwave. The pattern repeated so many times I stopped noticing it. When she stopped complaining about my hours, I thought she'd finally accepted this was just our season of life. I thought we were on the same page. I was wrong. The discovery wasn't dramatic, no lipstick on a collar or suspicious text messages. It was a single email notification that flashed across my laptop while it was connected to our TV for a movie night, one of the rare evenings I'd managed to keep clear. From Daniel Harper, subject, about last night. The preview text visible in the notification was enough. Kate, I can't stop thinking about what happened. When can I see you again? I know you said Alex works late on Thursday. Kate lunged for the remote and quickly switched the input source, but it was too late. I'd seen it. She knew I'd seen it. The movie night was over before it began. Alex, I can. I held up my hand. Don't. Not right now. I grabbed my keys and drove around for hours, trying to process what I'd just learned. Daniel Harper. The name was familiar. Kate had mentioned him a few times. A new marketing director at the publishing company where she worked as an editor. She'd talked about his innovative ideas, his dynamic presentations. I'd been half listening, nodding along while reviewing project specs in my head. When I finally returned home around 2 a.m., the house was dark. Kate was either asleep or pretending to be. I slept in the guest room, staring at the ceiling until morning light filtered through the blinds. The confrontation happened over coffee, both of us looking exhausted, the weight of unspoken words making the kitchen feel airless. How long? I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. Kate stared into her mug. 3 months. I absorbed this. 3 months. 12 weeks. While I'd been staying late at the office, finishing the Henderson project that had earned me a substantial bonus, money I'd planned to use for the European vacation Kate had been hinting at, she'd been with someone else. Are you in love with him? She flinched at the directness of the question. I don't know. Maybe. He makes me feel seen, Alex. He has time for me. The implication stung worse than the affair itself. So this is my fault? Because I work hard to give us the life you wanted? That's not fair, she said, finally meeting my eyes. This isn't about the house or the money. It's about connection. When was the last time you really asked about my day and actually listened to the answer? When was the last time we went out just because, not because it was scheduled 3 weeks in advance around your work commitments? I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but uncomfortable truths sometimes silence even the strongest rebuttals. I couldn't remember the last spontaneous date night. I couldn't recall the details of her current editing projects. What happens now? I asked instead. I don't know, Kate admitted. I never meant for this to happen. Daniel and I were just friends, working late on the Thompson manuscript, and then, it just evolved. Working late. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I worked late building structural supports for physical buildings, she worked late building something else entirely. I need some time, I said finally, standing up. I'm going to stay with Matt for a few days while I figure things out. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, Alex. I really am. I packed a bag with mechanical precision, 3 shirts, 3 pants, socks, underwear, toiletries. Basic necessities. My mind was oddly clear, focused on immediate logistics rather than the emotional earthquake reshaping my life's landscape. Matt didn't ask questions when I showed up at his door at 9 a.m. on a Saturday. He just nodded, showed me to his spare room, and said, "Beer's in the fridge when you're ready to talk." I wasn't ready that day, or the next. I went through the motions of existing, showering, eating when Matt put food in front of me, answering work emails on autopilot. On Sunday night, I called my supervisor and requested the week off, citing a family emergency. It was the first time in 5 years I'd taken unplanned leave. By Monday afternoon, Kate had called 17 times and sent 23 text messages. I read none of them. Matt screened my calls, letting me know only that she was trying to reach me, leaving the decision to respond entirely in my hands. I wasn't ignoring her out of spite or to punish her. I genuinely didn't know what to say. Every potential conversation seemed inadequate against the backdrop of 3 months of deception. On Tuesday morning, I finally felt clear-headed enough to start processing what had happened and what I wanted to do about it. I sat at Matt's kitchen table with a legal pad and began making notes, not just emotional reactions, but practical considerations. We had the house, jointly owned, various investment accounts, 5 years of intertwined finances and shared assets. No children, thankfully, though we'd been talking about starting a family soon. The irony of that timeline hit me anew. If Kate was already 3 months into an affair, what would have happened if she'd gotten pregnant? Would I have raised another man's child, oblivious? These practical concerns provided a framework, something concrete to focus on amid the emotional chaos. But they didn't address the central question: did I want to salvage my marriage? Kate had betrayed my trust in the most fundamental way, yet I couldn't dismiss her criticism entirely. I had been absent, physically present but mentally elsewhere. The success I'd achieved at work had come at a cost to our relationship. This didn't excuse her affair, nothing could, but it forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about my priorities. By Wednesday, I'd formulated a plan, not for reconciliation or divorce, but for clarity. I needed space and time to evaluate what I truly wanted, free from both the frantic pace of my job and the immediate emotional fallout of Kate's betrayal. I called Gordon Wilson, the founding partner of my firm and my direct supervisor. "Alex, I was getting worried. How's everything?" His concern sounded genuine, which made what I was about to do both easier and harder. "Not great, Gordon. I need to make a significant change, and I wanted to talk to you directly about it." "What's going on?" "Whatever it is, we can work it out." I took a deep breath. "I'm resigning, effective 2 weeks from today." The silence stretched for several seconds before Gordon responded. "This is unexpected. Is it another offer?" "Because we can counter." "It's not about money," I interrupted. "It's about balance. I need to step back and reevaluate some things in my life." Gordon, to his credit, didn't push further. He asked practical questions about transition plans for my projects, expressed regret at losing me, and assured me I'd always have a place at Wilson and Marks if I changed my mind. We agreed I'd come in tomorrow to begin the handover process. Next, I called a realtor I knew through work connections. I explained my situation in broad strokes: separation from my wife, need to liquidate assets quickly, and asked about rental properties in the area. By that afternoon, I had 3 apartment viewings scheduled for the following day. The final call was the hardest. I dialed Kate's number, steeling myself as it rang. "Alex?" Her voice was rough, like she'd been crying. "Thank God. I've been so worried." "We need to talk," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "I'll come by the house tomorrow evening around 7. "Okay, yes, that's good. I'll be here." "Alex, tomorrow," I said firmly, and ended the call. That night, I slept better than I had since discovering the affair. Not because the pain had diminished, but because having a plan, any plan, provided a sense of control in the middle of chaos. The next day unfolded according to my carefully orchestrated schedule. I went to the office, where I was met with surprised looks and concerned questions about my sudden resignation. I answered vaguely, mentioning personal reasons and new directions, while methodically transitioning my projects to colleagues. Gordon watched from his office, a mixture of confusion and respect on his face. Between meetings, I viewed 3 apartments, settling on a modern 1-bedroom downtown. It was walking distance to several engineering firms that had tried to recruit me over the years and close to the river trail where I used to run before work demands took over my mornings. The leasing agent, sensing my urgency, expedited the application process. I signed a 6-month lease on the spot, with a move-in date of Saturday, just 2 days away. At 7 sharp, I parked in front of what had been our home. Kate's car was in the driveway, and lights glowed warmly from within. For a moment, I sat in my car, absorbing the familiar sight and acknowledging that nothing would ever be the same again. Kate opened the door before I could knock. She looked simultaneously relieved to see me and terrified of what I might say. She'd prepared dinner, my favorite, beef bourguignon, and set the dining table with the good china we rarely used. "I thought we could talk over dinner," she said, her voice carefully hopeful. I shook my head. I'm not staying long. I just came to tell you my decisions, not to negotiate them. Her face fell, but she nodded, leading me to the living room. We sat across from each other, the coffee table between us like a demilitarized zone. I've resigned from Wilson and Marks, I began, watching her eyes widen in surprise. My last day is next Friday. You quit your job? Kate looked stunned. But you love that job. You've worked so hard. Yes, I did. That's partly why we're here now, isn't it? The words came out sharper than intended, and I took a breath to center myself. I'm also moving out. I've signed a lease on an apartment downtown, effective Saturday. Kate's composure cracked. You're leaving? Just like that? Without even trying to work through this? I'm creating space to think clearly, I corrected. Something I apparently haven't been doing for quite some time. What about the house? Our accounts? Everything we've built? I noted her concern about assets before relationship, though perhaps I was being uncharitable. I'll continue paying my half of the mortgage for now. We can discuss a more permanent arrangement once I've had time to process everything. As for our joint accounts, I've transferred half of our savings to my personal account. The rest remains available to you. Kate was crying now, tears streaming silently down her face. So that's it? You're just dismantling our life? The irony of her question hit me like a physical blow. Our life was dismantled the moment you decided Daniel Harper could provide something I couldn't. It wasn't like that, she protested. It just happened. I was lonely, Alex. So lonely. And now I need to be alone, I replied, standing up. I'll arrange to pick up more of my things on Saturday when you're at your sister's book club. I'd appreciate if you weren't here. Alex, please. Kate stood too, reaching for my hand. Can't we at least talk about this? About us? I gently withdrew my hand from her grasp. That's exactly what I'm trying to do, figure out if there still is an us to talk about. But I can't do that here, surrounded by reminders of what I thought we were building together. And what about him? She asked quietly. That's entirely up to you, I said honestly. I won't tell you who you can or can't see, but your choices will certainly inform mine. I left then, ignoring her calls as I walked to my car. The cool evening air filled my lungs, and for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe properly. Not because the pain had lessened, but because I was finally doing something active rather than simply reacting. The next week passed in a blur of activity. I finished my work transition, signed paperwork for my apartment, and purchased basic furnishings for my new place. Kate continued calling and texting, alternating between apologies, explanations, and increasingly desperate pleas for us to see a marriage counselor. I read her messages but responded only to logistical questions about the house or our finances. Each emotional appeal received the same answer: I needed time and space to evaluate what I wanted. It wasn't a punishment or a manipulation tactic, it was the simple truth. On Friday afternoon, I completed my final handover at Wilson and Marks. Gordon took me to lunch, still clearly baffled by my decision but respectful of it. The door is always open, Alex, he said as we parted. Whether it's in 6 months or 6 years. I thanked him sincerely. Wilson and Marks had been good to me, and my issues weren't with the firm but with how I'd allowed my work to consume me. Saturday morning, I arrived at the house while Kate was out, as arranged. I'd hired movers to expedite the process, focusing on items that were clearly mine and leaving anything ambiguous for later discussion. Within 2 hours, my clothes, personal effects, and home office equipment were loaded into a truck bound for my new apartment. As I did a final walkthrough to ensure I hadn't forgotten anything essential, I paused in our bedroom, Kate's bedroom now. On the nightstand sat a framed photo of us from our honeymoon in Bali, smiling on the beach at sunset. I picked it up, studying our younger, more carefree faces. 5 years. We'd been so hopeful then, so certain our love could weather any challenge. I carefully placed the photo back on the nightstand, turned, and walked out, closing the door gently behind me. By that evening, I was settled in my new apartment. The space was sparse but functional: a bed, a couch, a desk for my computer, and basic kitchen supplies. It felt temporary, transitional, which suited my current state perfectly. I spent Sunday exploring my new neighborhood, discovering a coffee shop with excellent espresso, a small bookstore with reading nooks, and a park where people walked their dogs in the late afternoon sun. For the first time in years, my schedule was entirely my own. No project deadlines looming, no client calls to prepare for, no presentation materials to review. The freedom felt both exhilarating and terrifying. Without the structure of my demanding job and the comfort of my marriage, who was I? What did I actually want from life? These were questions I neglected for too long, allowing external measures of success to dictate my choices. On Monday morning, instead of joining the rush hour commute to Wilson and Mark's, I went for a run along the river trail. The physical exertion cleared my head, and by the time I returned to my apartment, I had the beginnings of a new plan forming. I opened my laptop and began researching smaller engineering firms focused on sustainable development, an area I'd always been passionate about but had taken a backseat to the high-profile commercial projects at my former firm. I sent exploratory emails to 3 companies whose values aligned with my own, indicating my availability for conversations about potential opportunities. By mid-afternoon, I had 2 responses expressing interest in meeting. I scheduled interviews for later that week, feeling a spark of professional enthusiasm I hadn't experienced in years. That evening, Kate called again. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. "Alex," she sounded surprised, as if she hadn't expected me to pick up. "Thank you for answering. How are you?" "I'm managing," I replied truthfully. "How about you?" "Miserable," she admitted. "The house feels empty without you. I miss you so much." I didn't respond immediately, uncertain what to say. Part of me wanted to ask if she missed me or simply the stability my presence provided. Another part wondered if Daniel Harper was still in the picture or if my departure had clarified her feelings. "Alex? Are you still there?" "Yes," I said. "I'm just not sure what you want me to say, Kate. I'm still processing everything." "I understand," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. I want you to know I've ended things with Daniel. Completely. It was a terrible mistake, and I've been doing a lot of thinking about why it happened." "And what have you concluded?" I couldn't help but ask. "That I was looking outside our marriage for validation I should have been seeking through direct communication with you. Instead of telling you how lonely I felt, I allowed myself to be flattered by someone else's attention." She paused. "It wasn't your fault, Alex. Yes, you worked a lot, but I could have tried harder to reach you. I could have been more direct about what I needed." Her self-awareness surprised me. It would have been easier for both of us if she'd simply blamed my workaholic tendencies for driving her into another man's arms. Her willingness to accept responsibility suggested a depth of reflection I hadn't anticipated. "Thank you for saying that," I said finally. "It doesn't undo what happened, but I appreciate your honesty. Would you consider meeting for coffee sometime this week? Just to talk? No pressure about decisions or the future, just conversation." I considered her request. Part of me wanted to maintain the emotional distance I'd established, to continue processing independently. But another part recognized that any decision about our marriage would eventually require direct communication. "Okay," I agreed. "Thursday afternoon at Riverfront Coffee? Say around 3? The relief in her voice was palpable. "Yes, that's perfect. Thank you, Alex. Really." After we hung up, I sat on my new couch, staring out at the city lights coming on as dusk settled. The apartment still felt strange, impersonal, yet there was a certain peace in its simplicity. No history here, no memories of betrayal or recrimination embedded in the walls. For the first time since discovering Kate's affair, I allowed myself to consider what reconciliation might look like. Not a return to our previous dynamic, that clearly hadn't worked for either of us, but something new, built on more honest communication and clearer priorities. Could I trust her again? I didn't know. Could I forgive completely? Perhaps, with time. But the more pressing question was whether I wanted to try, whether what we had was worth salvaging despite the broken trust. As I prepared for bed that night, I realized something important. Regardless of what happened with Kate, the changes I'd made were necessary. I'd needed to step back from my all-consuming job. I'd needed to reassess my priorities. In a strange way, the pain of her betrayal had catalyzed changes I might never have made otherwise. I wasn't grateful for the affair. Nothing could make that acceptable. But I was beginning to recognize that sometimes, devastating endings create space for new beginnings. Whether those new beginnings would include Kate remained to be seen. But for the first time since that fateful movie night, I felt genuinely open to possibilities rather than trapped in certainties that had proven false. Thursday arrived with unexpected nervousness. I'd chosen Riverfront Coffee deliberately, neutral territory, public enough to discourage intense emotional scenes, but with quiet corners where conversation could happen without an audience. I arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a table near the back with a view of both the entrance and the river beyond the shop's large windows. Kate arrived precisely on time, pausing at the entrance to scan the room. When her eyes found mine, her face brightened momentarily before settling into something more cautious. She'd dressed carefully, the blue sweater I'd always liked, minimal makeup, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked both familiar and somehow different, as if the past weeks had changed her in subtle ways. "Hi," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Thank you for meeting me." "Of course," I replied, pushing a cup toward her. "I ordered your usual, vanilla latte, extra shot." Surprise flickered across her face. "You remembered. 5 years is a long time, Kate." She nodded, wrapping her hands around the cup. "Yes, it is. Though sometimes I feel like I didn't use that time very well." An awkward silence settled between us. Despite preparing mentally for this meeting, I found myself uncertain where to begin. Kate apparently felt the same, her fingers tracing patterns on her cup as she gathered her thoughts. "How are you?" she finally asked. "Really, I mean." Not just the polite answer. I considered the question seriously. "I'm finding my way. The new apartment is coming together. I've had interviews with 2 engineering firms, smaller places focused on sustainable development." "That sounds promising," she said with what seemed like genuine interest. "You always talked about wanting to work on greener projects." "I did, didn't I?" I realized with some surprise. Somewhere along the way, I got caught up in the prestige projects at Wilson and Marks and lost sight of what actually mattered to me. "We both did," Kate said quietly. "Got caught up in things that weren't actually making us happy, I mean." I nodded, acknowledging the parallel without endorsing the comparison. Her unhappiness had led to betrayal, mine had only led to overwork. "Tell me about your week," I said, partly from politeness and partly from genuine curiosity about how she was managing. "Honestly? It's been difficult." She met my eyes directly. "The house feels empty. I'm sleeping badly. Work is complicated, given everything that happened with Daniel." The mention of his name hung between us, unavoidable but uncomfortable. "Has he been bothering you?" I asked, surprised by the protective instinct that flared despite everything. "No, nothing like that," she assured me. "He requested a transfer to the Seattle office after I ended things. It's just awkward with colleagues who knew or suspected something was happening." I nodded, sipping my coffee to mask whatever expression might be crossing my face. The confirmation that she'd actually ended things with Daniel was both a relief and a complication. It would have been easier, in some ways, if she'd continued the relationship, a cleaner break, a simpler path forward for me. "Alex," Kate said after a moment, "I need to say something important, and I want you to know it comes with no expectations. I just need to say it." I steeled myself, nodding for her to continue. "I am profoundly sorry for betraying your trust. It was the worst mistake of my life, and I will regret it forever." Her voice was steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "I've been working with a therapist to understand why I made such destructive choices instead of communicating what I needed in our marriage. That's not an excuse, nothing excuses what I did, but I want you to know I'm committed to understanding why it happened so it never happens again, whether that's with you or in any future relationship." The prepared nature of her statement didn't diminish its apparent sincerity. If anything, the fact that she'd thought carefully about what she wanted to say made it more meaningful than an emotional, impulsive apology might have been. "I appreciate that," I said when she'd finished. "And I'm glad you're talking to someone. I've been doing some reflecting too, though not with a professional." "What have you been thinking about?" she asked cautiously. I gazed out at the river for a moment, organizing my thoughts. About balance. About how I let work consume me because success there was measurable, concrete. I could see the buildings rise, track the progress, quantify my value in promotions and bonuses. It was easier than the messy, uncertain work of maintaining emotional connection. Kate nodded encouragingly. "That makes sense. And I think I did something similar, throwing myself into projects at work where I felt competent instead of addressing the growing distance between us. The difference," I said quietly, "is that I channeled that avoidance into more work. You channeled it into Daniel." She flinched but didn't look away. "Yes. And that's entirely on me. I made that choice, not you." Her willingness to accept full responsibility for the affair, without qualifications or deflections, felt significant. In the initial aftermath, she'd made comments about my absence, my emotional unavailability, not directly blaming me, but drawing connections that distributed the responsibility. Now, she was drawing a clear line between our mutual neglect of the marriage and her personal choice to betray it. "Where do you think that leaves us?" I asked, the question I'd been avoiding since the beginning. Kate took a deep breath. "Honestly? I don't know. I love you, Alex. I never stopped, even when I was making terrible choices that hurt you. I want to rebuild what we had, or rather, build something better than what we had. But I also understand if that's not possible, if the trust is too broken to repair." Her answer was thoughtful, neither pressuring me for reconciliation nor abdicating responsibility for the work it would require. Once again, I was struck by the apparent depth of her reflection during our separation. "I need to be honest too," I said carefully. "I haven't decided what I want yet. Part of me misses you and our life together. Another part isn't sure I can ever fully trust again. And a third part wonders if maybe this whole situation is forcing both of us to make changes we needed to make anyway, changes that might lead us in different directions." "I understand," she said, though pain flickered across her face. "And I respect your need for time and space to figure that out. I'm not trying to rush you." We spent the next hour talking more generally, about her work projects, about the interviews I'd had, about mutual friends who'd reached out to both of us with concern. The conversation flowed more easily than I'd expected, occasional moments of tension giving way to stretches of familiar comfort. As our time wound down, Kate hesitantly brought up a practical matter. "The house, I've been thinking about it, and it feels too big for just me. Too empty. I've been considering selling it, but I wanted to discuss it with you first." The suggestion surprised me. The house had been Kate's dream more than mine, the historic woodwork, the established neighborhood, the formal dining room for entertaining. I'd wanted it because she wanted it. "Are you sure? You loved that house." She shrugged slightly. "I thought I did. But being there alone has made me realize I was more attached to the idea of it, what it represented about our success, than the actual space. It feels hollow now." I nodded, understanding completely. "If you want to sell, I'm open to it. We can talk to a realtor about timing and market conditions." "Thank you," she said, looking relieved. "I'll start researching options." As we prepared to leave, Kate hesitated. "Would it be all right if we did this again? The coffee, I mean. Maybe next week?" I considered her request. The conversation had been easier than anticipated, and maintaining communication would be necessary regardless of my ultimate decision about our marriage. "Sure," I agreed. "Same time next Thursday?" Her smile was genuine, if restrained. "Perfect. Thank you, Alex, for everything, for talking, for listening, for being willing to meet at all." We parted with an awkward half-hug outside the coffee shop, neither of us quite sure of the appropriate physical boundaries in our current limbo state. As I watched her walk to her car, I felt a complicated mixture of emotions, lingering hurt, cautious hope, and a strange sense of pride in how we'd managed this first real conversation since the separation. The next day, I received an offer from Granger Sustainable Design, one of the firms I'd interviewed with. The position offered significantly less money than I'd made at Wilson and Marks but promised to focus on environmentally conscious projects and explicitly capped weekly hours at 45. The work-life balance was built into the company culture, not just a buzzword in their recruiting materials. I accepted immediately, feeling a weight lift that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. The role would start in 2 weeks, giving me time to settle into my new apartment and establish routines that didn't revolve entirely around work. That weekend, I decided to explore my new neighborhood more thoroughly. I discovered a farmer's market 4 blocks from my apartment, a community garden with open plots for residents, and a cycling group that met Sunday mornings for rides along the river. On impulse, I signed up for the garden plot and committed to joining the next group ride, small steps toward the more balanced life I was trying to build. Kate texted on Sunday evening. "Just wanted to say I enjoyed our talk. Looking forward to Thursday. Also, I contacted a realtor about the house, she's coming for an assessment on Tuesday. I'll share her thoughts once I have them." I replied with a simple acknowledgement and brief mention of my new job. The exchange was friendly but restrained, a new dynamic we were both navigating carefully. The week settled into a peculiar rhythm. Without the demands of work, I found myself with time to reflect, to explore, to simply be present in ways I hadn't experienced in years. I spent mornings at the coffee shop reading actual books rather than project briefs. I took afternoon walks along the river, observing the subtle shifts in water levels and wildlife. I prepared proper meals instead of relying on takeout or whatever Kate had left in the microwave. In quiet moments, I found myself thinking about our marriage, not just the betrayal that had fractured it, but the slow drift that had preceded the breaking point. How had we gone from passionate partners with shared dreams to essentially roommates passing in the hallway? The affair was Kate's choice alone, but the deterioration of our connection had been a joint failure. I also thought about Daniel Harper. I knew almost nothing about him beyond his name and position. Was he just opportunistic, sensing Kate's loneliness and exploiting it? Or had there been genuine feelings involved? I wasn't sure which possibility was worse. By the time Thursday arrived, I had more questions than answers. but they were at least more thoughtful questions than the reactive anger that had initially driven my decisions. Our second coffee meeting followed a similar pattern to the first, cautious but increasingly comfortable conversation about our separate lives, with occasional careful ventures into more emotional territory. Kate mentioned her therapy was helping her recognize patterns from her childhood that had contributed to her conflict avoidance and need for external validation. My parents never argued, at least not where we could hear, she explained. Any disagreement happened behind closed doors, and then they presented a united front. I internalized this idea that conflict meant failure, that expressing dissatisfaction was somehow disloyal. So instead of telling me directly that you were unhappy with our dynamic, you just found fulfillment elsewhere, I observed, trying to keep judgment from my voice. Kate winced but nodded. It's not an excuse, but yes, that's essentially the pattern. Instead of risking the conflict that might have actually fixed the problem, I created an escape valve that ultimately caused a much bigger explosion. The insight seemed genuine, and I appreciated her ability to analyze her behavior without using it to absolve herself of responsibility. What about you? She asked carefully. Have you had any revelations about your patterns? I considered the question seriously. I think I've been hiding in achievement. As long as I was visibly successful, promotions, raises, prestigious projects, I could avoid asking whether I was actually fulfilled. Work became my identity because it was safer than facing the more complex questions of who I am and what actually makes me happy. Kate's expression softened. That makes a lot of sense, especially given your family dynamics. She was referring to my father, whose approval had always been conditional on achievement. Second place might as well have been last in his estimation. While I'd recognized this pattern intellectually before, I'd never fully acknowledged how deeply it had shaped my adult choices. I'm trying to break that pattern now, I said. The new job is part of that, choosing meaning over prestige, balance over status. I'm proud of you, Kate said, then looked immediately uncertain. Is that okay to say? It's fine, I assured her. I'm proud of me too, honestly. It wasn't an easy decision. The conversation shifted to the house sale. The realtor believed we could get significantly more than we'd paid 5 years ago, given neighborhood developments and the overall market. Kate had already found a small apartment she liked, not far from her office. What about you? She asked. Is your place working out? It is, surprisingly well. The location is perfect, close to everything I need, including my new office. I'm enjoying the simplicity of it. As we prepared to leave, Kate asked the question I'd been expecting. Have you thought any more about us? About what you want going forward? I appreciated that she'd waited until the end of our time together to broach the subject, rather than making it the focus of our entire conversation. I have been thinking about it, I acknowledged. But I'm still not certain. This time apart has been clarifying in many ways, but the trust issue remains significant. Kate nodded, accepting this without protest. I understand. And I meant what I said before, I'm not trying to pressure you. I miss you, Alex. Not just as my husband, but as my friend. The person I could talk to about anything. The irony of her statement wasn't lost on either of us. If she'd truly talked to me about anything, we might not be in this situation. I miss aspects of our life together too, I admitted. But I think this separation is necessary, regardless of the outcome. We both needed to step back and reevaluate independently. I agree, she said, surprising me slightly. As painful as it's been, I'm learning things about myself I might never have confronted otherwise. We parted with another awkward hug, this one lasting a moment longer than the previous weeks. As I walked back to my apartment, I found myself wondering what reconciliation might look like if we decided to attempt it. Not a return to our previous dynamic, certainly, but something new built on clearer communication and more authentic connection. The next 2 weeks passed quickly. I started my new position at Granger, immediately appreciating the different culture. Projects were challenging but reasonably scoped. Team members left at sensible hours. My supervisor explicitly told me not to check email on weekends. It was disorienting at first, after years of constant connection to work, but refreshingly humane. Kate and I continued our Thursday coffee meetings, each one feeling slightly more natural than the last. We discussed the house sale, which was progressing rapidly in a hot market. We talked about my new job and her current projects. We shared insights from our respective therapeutic work, hers with a professional, mine through reading and self-reflection. What we didn't discuss directly was the affair itself or specific decisions about our marriage. Both topics hovered in the background of every conversation, acknowledged but not confronted head-on. I still wasn't ready, and Kate seemed to respect that boundary without resentment. By the fourth Thursday, as October gave way to November and coffee meetings shifted to include warmer layers and occasional rain, something had changed subtly in our dynamic. The awkwardness had largely dissipated, replaced by a cautious comfort that reminded me of our early dating days, before shared assets and legal commitments, when we were still discovering each other. "I have news," Kate said as she settled into her usual seat. "I've accepted a new position." "At another publishing house?" I asked, surprised. "No, actually. I'm joining Literacy Partners as their program director. It's a nonprofit that works with underprivileged communities to improve adult literacy and early childhood reading programs." The career shift was unexpected. Kate had always seemed content in commercial publishing, working with best-selling authors and market-driven content. "That's a significant change," I observed. "What prompted it?" "Everything that's happened, honestly." She wrapped her hands around her cup. "I've been reassessing what matters to me, just like you have. I realized I've been chasing prestige projects and big-name authors without considering whether the work itself was meaningful to me. The parallel to my own career shift wasn't lost on me. We were both, independently, reevaluating our priorities and making changes that aligned more authentically with our values. "The pay is significantly less," she continued, "but the work feels important in a way my current role doesn't. And the hours are more structured, which will help me maintain better boundaries." "It sounds perfect for you," I said sincerely. "When do you start?" "January. After the holidays, and after the house sale is finalized." She hesitated. "Which brings me to something else I wanted to discuss. The realtor has an offer, significantly above asking price, all cash, with a flexible closing timeline. But they want a decision by Monday." I processed this information. The house sale had always been theoretical until this moment, a decision we'd agreed to in principle but hadn't faced concretely. Now, a real offer demanded a real response. "Do you have the details?" "I'd like to review them." Kate nodded, pulling a folder from her bag. "I made copies of everything. The realtor said it's an excellent offer, probably the best we'll get in the current market." I scanned the documents, noting the purchase price, nearly 40% above what we'd paid, and the proposed timeline. The buyers were flexible on the closing date, willing to work around Kate's needs since they weren't in a hurry to move in. "This looks reasonable to me," I said, closing the folder. "If you're comfortable with it, I think we should accept." "I am," Kate confirmed. "It feels right to make a clean break, to let another family create their own memories there." The symbolism of selling our marital home wasn't lost on either of us. Whether we ultimately reconciled or divorced, that chapter of our life together was closing. Whatever came next would happen in new spaces, unburdened by the ghosts of betrayal that now haunted our former home. "I'll let the realtor know tomorrow," Kate said. She hesitated, then added, "With the sale moving forward and my job change coming up, it feels like everything is shifting. I can't help wondering where we'll end up in all this change." It was the closest she'd come in weeks to directly asking about the future of our marriage. I understood her need for some clarity, even as I continued to process my own feelings. "I've been thinking about that too," I admitted. "And while I'm still not ready for a definitive decision, I think I'm ready for a more direct conversation about possibilities. Maybe not today, but soon." Hope flickered in her eyes. "I'd like that. Whenever you're ready." As we left the coffee shop that day, our goodbye hug felt more natural, less fraught with uncertainty. Walking back to my apartment, I realized something important. Despite everything that had happened, I still cared deeply for Kate. The question wasn't whether I had feelings for her, but whether those feelings could exist within a framework of renewed trust. That weekend, I joined the Sunday cycling group for the first time, enjoying the physical exertion and casual camaraderie of like-minded enthusiasts. One of the riders, a woman named Elise, chatted with me throughout the route, her friendly conversation a welcome distraction from my ongoing personal dilemmas. When she suggested grabbing lunch afterward, I agreed without much thought. Over sandwiches at a local cafe, Elise was easy company, funny, intelligent, and refreshingly straightforward. As we were preparing to leave, she smiled and said, "We should do this again sometime. Maybe not just after writing?" The invitation caught me off guard. I hadn't thought of our lunch as anything beyond friendly post-exercise refueling, but her tone suggested potential interest in something more. "I'm actually in a complicated situation right now," I said honestly. "Separated from my wife, still figuring things out." Elise nodded, taking this in stride. "I appreciate the honesty. The offer stands for just friendly lunch too, no pressure. Sometimes talking to someone completely outside your situation can help clarify things." I thanked her for understanding and promised to join the next week's ride, genuinely appreciating her low-key approach to what could have been an awkward moment. That evening, I found myself thinking about Elisa's invitation and my immediate response. I hadn't even considered accepting, despite her obvious appeal and my uncertain marital status. This seemed significant, an unconscious indication that part of me still considered myself committed to Kate, despite everything that had happened. By the time Thursday came around again, I had made a decision. Not the final decision about our marriage, but an intermediate step that felt right. When Kate arrived at the coffee shop, I suggested we take our drinks to go and walk along the riverfront instead of staying inside. It's a beautiful day, I explained, and I think this conversation might be better in motion. Kate agreed readily, clearly curious about my change to our established routine. We collected our drinks and headed to the riverside path, walking slowly as the late autumn sun cast long shadows across the water. I've been doing a lot of thinking, I began after we'd walked in comfortable silence for a few minutes. About us, about what happened, about what might come next. Kate nodded, giving me space to continue at my own pace. The affair was devastating, I said simply. It shattered something fundamental in how I saw our relationship, and rebuilding that trust would take significant time and effort from both of us. I understand, she said quietly, a resignation in her voice suggesting she anticipated where this was heading. But, I continued, I've realized something important during our time apart. Despite the betrayal, I still care deeply about you. And I've come to believe that what we're both learning through this painful process could potentially lead to a stronger, more authentic connection than we had before, if we're both committed to doing that work together. Kate stopped walking, turning to face me directly. Are you saying you want to try to reconcile? I'm saying I'm open to exploring that possibility, I clarified. Not moving back in together immediately or pretending everything is fixed, but intentionally working toward rebuilding our relationship with better foundations. Hope blossomed across her face. I would want nothing more than that opportunity, Alex. I know I can't erase what happened, but I promise you I'm committed to doing whatever work is necessary to rebuild your trust and create something healthier between us. It would mean continued therapy for you, I said. Probably couples counseling for both of us. Complete transparency. Difficult conversations about what happened and why. Yes to all of that, she agreed without hesitation. Whatever it takes. And we'd need to take things slowly, I added. Date again, essentially. Get to know who we are now, after everything that's happened. These versions of ourselves are different from who we were before. Kate nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. I'd like that, getting to know this version of you. He seems more centered, more clear about what matters. And this version of you seems more self-aware, more directly communicative, I acknowledged. Those are positive changes, however painfully they came about. We resumed walking, the tension that had surrounded us for weeks finally beginning to dissipate. Nothing was resolved completely, trust wouldn't be rebuilt in a single conversation, but the path forward was clearer than it had been since the night I discovered the affair. So what happens next? Kate asked as we neared the end of the riverfront path. Dinner, I said simply. A proper date, next Friday evening. I'll pick you up at 7. Her smile was radiant despite the tears still threatening to spill over. I'd like that very much. As we parted that day, our hug felt natural for the first time since the separation, still careful, but without the awkward uncertainty that had characterized our previous goodbyes. Walking back to my apartment, I felt a cautious optimism I hadn't experienced in months. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. Trust, once broken, couldn't be repaired without significant effort from both parties. But for the first time, I could envision a future where Kate and I emerged from this crisis stronger, not despite the affair, but because of how it had forced us both to confront patterns we might otherwise have continued indefinitely. She had said I was too busy for her, and found someone at work who wasn't. The painful irony was that she'd been right about the problem, if catastrophically wrong about the solution. We'd both been too busy, me with work, her with maintaining appearances, to nurture the connection that mattered most. Now, having lost nearly everything, we had the opportunity to rebuild with intention, authenticity, and clearer priorities. Whether that rebuilding would ultimately succeed remained uncertain, but I was finally ready to attempt the journey, one careful step at a time. Our first official date felt strange, like actors playing roles we once knew intimately but had somehow forgotten the lines for. I picked Kate up at her new apartment, a modern one-bedroom not unlike my own. She'd dressed carefully in a burgundy dress I'd never seen before, her hair styled in loose waves that framed her face. You look beautiful, I said, meaning it. Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself, she replied with a hint of the playful banter we'd once shared effortlessly. I'd chosen a restaurant neither of us had been to before, no memories attached, no ghosts of happier times to haunt us. The conversation started awkwardly, both of us hyper-aware of potential landmines, but gradually eased as we found safer topics: my new colleagues, her transition plan at the publishing house, the surprisingly smooth process of selling our home. The closing is scheduled for next Thursday, Kate mentioned as we shared dessert. Will you be able to make it to the signing? I should. My schedule's much more predictable now, I replied, noting the irony that hadn't escaped either of us. Now that we weren't living together, I finally had the work-life balance she'd always wanted. As the evening progressed, I found myself studying Kate with new eyes. The woman across from me was simultaneously familiar and strange, the same person I'd married but fundamentally altered by the consequences of her choices. I wondered if she saw similar changes in me. This is strange, isn't it? She said suddenly, as if reading my thoughts. Trying to date each other after everything that's happened. It is, I agreed. But maybe that's not entirely bad. We're seeing each other more clearly than we have in years. The drive back to her apartment was quiet, both of us processing the evening. When I walked her to her door, there was a moment of uncertainty, the traditional end-of-date pause that once would have ended naturally in a kiss. Thank you for tonight, Kate said softly. For being willing to try. I'm glad we did, I replied honestly. After a moment's hesitation, I leaned forward and placed a light kiss on her cheek, not the passionate reunion she might have hoped for, but not the cold distance of recent weeks either. A middle ground, a starting point. Her smile was genuine if a bit wistful. Good night, Alex. In the weeks that followed, we established a new routine: Thursday coffee, now firmly established as our time, and Friday or Saturday date nights. We tried new restaurants, attended a local theater production, walked through an art exhibit downtown. Normal couple activities, performed with the careful awareness of people relearning each other. Throughout December, as holiday decorations appeared around the city, we navigated the awkward territory of celebrations. After some discussion, we decided to attend my company's holiday party together, my first public introduction of Kate to my new colleagues. The evening went surprisingly well, Kate charming my coworkers while respecting the boundaries we'd established. No excessive displays of affection, no pretending everything was perfect, just two adults consciously choosing each other's company. The house closing happened smoothly, the proceeds split equally between our separate accounts. Financially untangling our lives proved simpler than I'd anticipated, perhaps because neither of us was interested in punitive divisions. We both seemed to recognize that a clean, fair separation of assets was in everyone's best interest, regardless of where our relationship ultimately headed. 2 weeks before Christmas, we had our first session with a couples therapist, Dr. Mercer, a direct woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense approach that appealed to both of us. I understand you're in an unusual situation, she observed after we'd shared the basics of our history. Not fully separated, not fully reconciled. Exploring the possibility of rebuilding while acknowledging the serious breach of trust that occurred. We both nodded, appreciating her accurate assessment. This won't be easy, she warned. Infidelity creates a trauma response in the betrayed partner that can take years to fully resolve. The work isn't just about forgiveness, it's about creating new patterns of interaction and rebuilding fundamental trust. We understand, Kate said. We're both committed to doing that work. Dr. Mercer looked directly at me. Are you, Alex? It's perfectly valid if you're still uncertain. Ambivalence is a normal response to betrayal. I appreciated her directness. I'm committed to exploring whether rebuilding is possible. I care deeply for Kate, but I'm still working through the trust issues. That's why we're here, to figure out if we can move forward together in a healthy way. The therapist nodded, apparently satisfied with my honest assessment. Then let's begin. That first session was challenging, establishing ground rules, discussing communication patterns, setting expectations for the work ahead. We left emotionally exhausted but with a clearer framework for the journey we were undertaking. That was harder than I expected, Kate admitted as we walked to our cars. It's just the beginning, I replied. It's going to get more difficult before it gets easier. She nodded, reaching for my hand. I know. But I'm not going anywhere, Alex. I'm in this for as long as you're willing to try. I squeezed her hand, a small gesture of acknowledgement if not quite forgiveness yet. Christmas presented its own challenges. After discussion, we decided to spend the actual day separately, Kate with her parents, me with mine, but planned a private exchange of gifts the evening before. It was a compromise that acknowledged both our ongoing connection and the reality that we weren't yet fully reconciled. When Kate arrived at my apartment on Christmas Eve, she carried a small, carefully wrapped package. I'd prepared a simple dinner, nothing elaborate but thoughtfully chosen, her favorite pasta dish, a good bottle of wine, fresh bread from the bakery down the street. "This feels nice," she said as we settled at my small dining table. "Quieter than our usual holidays, but peaceful." She was right. Our previous Christmases had often been hectic, elaborate decorations, multiple family obligations, the pressure of perfect gift exchanges. This simpler celebration felt more meaningful somehow, more focused on connection than performance. After dinner, we exchanged gifts. I'd chosen a leather-bound journal, remembering how meaningful her therapeutic journaling had been. "For your new thoughts, new chapters," I explained as she unwrapped it. "Something that's just yours." Her eyes glistened with understanding of the deeper meaning, an acknowledgement of her journey toward greater self-awareness and authenticity. Kate's gift to me was a custom star map, showing the night sky exactly as it had appeared on our first date 11 years earlier. "To remember where we started," she said softly. "And to acknowledge that even if the stars move, some patterns remain constant if you know how to look for them." The thoughtfulness of the gift moved me unexpectedly. It wasn't extravagant or showy, just deeply personal, a reflection of the more authentic connection we were trying to build. As the evening wound down, Kate hesitated at the door. "I've been thinking about New Year's," she said carefully. "My parents are hosting their usual party, and they asked if we'd both come. I told them I needed to check with you first." The invitation presented a new threshold, appearing together at a family function, navigating the curious gazes and inevitable questions about our status. I wasn't sure if we were ready for that level of public scrutiny. "Let me think about it?" I asked. "It's not a no, just, I need to consider what feels right." "Of course," she agreed immediately. "No pressure. We can do something just the two of us instead, or even spend it separately if that's better." Her willingness to accept whatever boundaries I needed, without guilt or manipulation, represented one of the most significant changes in our dynamic. The old Kate might have pushed, might have used emotional appeals to secure my attendance. This version respected my agency completely. After she left, I considered the invitation carefully. Attending the party would be challenging but might also provide closure to the year's difficulties, a symbolic step toward whatever came next. After a few days of reflection, I texted Kate that I'd accompany her, with the understanding that we could leave early if it became uncomfortable. New Year's Eve arrived cold and clear. I picked Kate up looking elegant in a simple black dress, her only jewelry a pair of earrings I'd given her years earlier, a thoughtful touch that didn't escape my notice. "Ready for this?" I asked as we drove toward her parents' home in the suburbs. "As ready as I can be," she replied. "Mom knows not to make a big deal about us arriving together, but you know how she gets at these parties." I did indeed. Martha Bennett was a gracious hostess but loved nothing more than drawing attention to her guests, especially family members. It had been endearing when things were good between Kate and me, uncomfortable when they weren't. The party was already in full swing when we arrived. Heads turned subtly as we entered together, curious glances quickly masked behind polite smiles. Kate's parents greeted us with careful enthusiasm, clearly thrilled to see us together but trying not to overemphasize it. "You both look wonderful," Martha said, hugging Kate then me. "Drinks are on the patio bar, and there's plenty of food in the dining room." The next hour passed in a blur of small talk and careful navigation. Some guests avoided all mention of our separation, creating awkward conversational gymnastics. Others inquired directly, forcing us to deliver the carefully crafted response we'd prepared. "We're working through things together, one day at a time." By 11, I needed a break from the social performance. I slipped outside to the garden patio, now empty as guests had moved indoors to escape the chilly night air. The solitude was welcome, giving me space to process the evening's emotions. "Mind some company?" Kate's voice came from behind me. When I turned, she was holding 2 glasses of champagne. "I thought you might need this." "Thanks," I said, accepting the glass. "Just needed some air." She nodded, understanding. "It's a lot, isn't it? Everyone watching, trying to figure out what's happening with us. When half the time, we're not even sure ourselves," I added with a small smile. We stood in comfortable silence, watching our breath form small clouds in the cold night air. From inside came the sounds of laughter and music, life continuing normally for everyone else while we navigated our complicated limbo. "What are you thinking about?" Kate asked eventually. "This time last year," I admitted. "How different everything was. How certain I was about our future." Kate's face reflected the pain of recognition. "I'm so sorry, Alex. For destroying that certainty, that trust." "I know you are," I said, and I meant it. After months of therapy, both individual and couples, I no longer doubted the sincerity of her remorse. The question that remained was whether remorse, however genuine, was enough to rebuild what had been broken. Inside, the countdown to midnight began. 10, 9, 8. Should we go in? Kate asked, not moving. No, I decided. Let's stay here. 7, 6, 5. We turned toward each other, the moment heavy with unspoken meaning. This midnight threshold represented more than just a calendar change. It symbolized the passage from our old life to whatever came next. 4, 3, 2. Alex, Kate whispered, whatever happens with us, I want you to know that loving you has been the most meaningful part of my life. Even with all my mistakes, that's never changed. 1. As cheers erupted inside, I made a decision. I leaned forward and kissed her, not the passionate reunion kiss of romantic movies, but something gentler, more tentative. A kiss that acknowledged our history while remaining uncertain about our future. A beginning, not an ending. When we separated, tears glistened in Kate's eyes. Happy New Year, she said softly. Happy New Year, I echoed, surprised by the hope I felt despite everything. The months that followed brought continued work, both individually and together. Weekly therapy sessions helped us identify patterns, improve communication, and gradually rebuild trust. Our date nights evolved from cautious interactions to more comfortable connection. Slowly, the ease we once shared began to return, though transformed by the greater awareness we both brought to our interactions. By spring, when cherry blossoms lined the river near my apartment, we'd reached a new milestone in our relationship, discussing living arrangements. After much consideration, we decided against moving back in together immediately, instead opting for a gradual transition, Kate staying over occasionally, then regularly, while maintaining her own apartment as a safety net for both of us. Are you sure you're ready for this? Dr. Mercer asked during a session in late March. Cohabitation, even part-time, represents a significant step. I think so, I replied after careful consideration. We've been doing the work, individually and together. The trust is rebuilding, slowly but genuinely. Kate? Dr. Mercer turned to her. I'm ready if Alex is, she said simply. I understand this doesn't mean everything's fixed, just that we're continuing to move forward together. Dr. Mercer nodded, satisfied with our realistic assessment. Then I support your decision, with the understanding that you'll continue our sessions throughout this transition. By summer, nearly a year after discovering Kate's affair, we'd established a new normal, Kate staying at my apartment 4 nights a week, maintaining her own place but spending less and less time there. My new job continued to provide the balance I'd never achieved at Wilson and Marks, while Kate thrived in her role at Literacy Partners, finding meaning in work that aligned with her values rather than just her ambitions. I've been thinking, Kate said one warm evening as we sat on my small balcony, watching the sunset. My lease is up for renewal next month. And? I prompted, though I suspected where this was heading. And I'm wondering if it makes sense to renew it, given that I spend most of my time here now. But it's completely your call, she added quickly. I know moving in together officially is a big step. I considered the question seriously, as I'd learned to do with all significant decisions over the past year. The affair had taught me not to react impulsively or to make choices based on external expectations. I think I'm ready for that, I said finally. If you are. Kate's smile was radiant but controlled, joy tempered by the awareness of how far we'd come and how easily it could have gone differently. There's something else I've been considering, I continued. Something I wanted to discuss with you. What is it? She asked, curiosity evident in her expression. Gordon called last week. Wilson and Marks is developing a new sustainable division, focusing exclusively on environmentally conscious projects. He's offered me a leadership role, better hours than before, more aligned with my interests, and a significant say in establishing the division's culture. Kate listened attentively, her expression carefully neutral. How do you feel about it? Mixed, I admitted. The opportunity is appealing professionally, but I'm wary of falling back into old patterns. What does your gut tell you? She asked, the question reflecting our therapist's frequent refrain about trusting our instincts. That I could do it differently this time. That I know now what really matters, and I wouldn't sacrifice our relationship for professional advancement. I paused, meeting her eyes directly. But I wouldn't consider it without discussing it thoroughly with you first. Kate reached for my hand. I appreciate that more than I can say. And I trust that you would maintain boundaries this time. You've proven that consistently over the past year. She squeezed my fingers gently. Whatever you decide, I support you. Her response embodied the new dynamic we'd built, open communication, mutual support, respect for each other's autonomy within the context of partnership. The contrast with our previous patterns couldn't have been starker. In the end, after careful consideration and multiple discussions both with Kate and Dr. Mercer, I decided to accept Gordon's offer, with clear written parameters about hours, expectations, and work-life boundaries. Kate didn't renew her lease, and we began the process of integrating our separate lives back into a shared one, this time with greater awareness and intention. 18 months after discovering Kate's affair with Daniel Harper, we found ourselves in a relationship that bore little resemblance to our previous marriage. The trust, so thoroughly shattered, had been painstakingly rebuilt, not to its previous state of blind faith, but to something more resilient because it acknowledged the possibility of harm while choosing connection anyway. "Do you think you've forgiven me?" Kate asked one night as we lay in bed, the question she'd never directly posed throughout our reconciliation process. I considered it carefully. I think forgiveness isn't a single moment but a practice. Some days it's easier than others. But yes, I believe I have forgiven you, even if I haven't forgotten. "I wouldn't expect you to forget," she said softly. "I certainly never will. The affair will always be part of our history," I acknowledged. "But it doesn't have to define our future." She nestled closer to me, her head on my chest. "Thank you for being willing to try again, Alex. For seeing potential in us even when I'd given you every reason to walk away." "Thank you for doing the work," I replied. "For becoming someone I could trust again, even when that seemed impossible." The path we'd traveled hadn't been easy. The pain of betrayal doesn't disappear completely, even with time and therapeutic intervention. But something new had emerged from the wreckage of our first marriage, something more honest, more resilient, more authentically connected. Kate had once said I was too busy for her, and found someone at work who wasn't. The painful irony was that through losing almost everything, we'd both found what truly mattered, not career advancement or social appearances, but genuine connection built on mutual respect and intentional presence. The busy man who'd prioritized work over relationship was gone, replaced by someone who understood the value of balance. The woman who'd sought external validation rather than direct communication was transformed into someone capable of honest vulnerability and authentic self-expression. We'd destroyed our first marriage through neglect and betrayal, but from its ashes, we'd built something new, not perfect, not without scars, but far stronger than what we'd lost. 5 years after the affair, Kate and I sat on the deck of our lakeside cabin, watching the sunset paint the water in brilliant oranges and pinks. We'd purchased this weekend retreat 3 years ago, a mutual decision made after careful financial planning and lengthy discussions about what we both wanted from our shared life moving forward. "Can you believe it's been 5 years?" Kate asked, swirling the wine in her glass. "Sometimes it feels like another lifetime." "In some ways, it was," I replied thoughtfully. "We're different people now." The observation wasn't just sentimental reflection. We had both transformed in fundamental ways since those painful months of separation and cautious reconciliation. The changes that had begun as crisis responses had evolved into sustainable patterns that served us well. My role at Wilson and Mark's sustainable division had proven surprisingly fulfilling. Under my leadership, the team had developed a reputation for innovative environmental design while maintaining strict work-life boundaries. I rarely missed dinner these days, and weekend work had become the exception rather than the rule. More importantly, when I was home, I was fully present, not physically there but mentally still at the office. Kate had thrived at Literacy Partners, eventually becoming their executive director. The work aligned perfectly with her strengths and values, providing the meaning her publishing career had lacked. She'd developed a directness in communication that would have seemed impossible in our previous dynamic, addressing potential issues immediately rather than allowing resentment to build. "Do you ever wonder where we'd be if I hadn't?" Kate's question trailed off, the specific words unnecessary after all this time. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But not with regret anymore. Just curiosity about parallel paths." We'd discussed this before in therapy, the strange paradox that the worst experience of our marriage had ultimately led to its transformation into something healthier. Neither of us would ever frame the affair as worth it or for the best, yet we couldn't deny that the painful aftermath had catalyzed necessary changes we might never have made otherwise. "I saw Daniel last week," Kate said quietly. It wasn't a dramatic revelation. Our rebuilt trust included the understanding that she would mention any encounters with her former affair partner, however coincidental. "At the literacy conference in Seattle. He's working for an educational publisher now." "How was that?" I asked, genuinely curious rather than suspicious. "Strange," she reflected. "Like seeing a character from a movie I barely remember." There was a time when his attention seemed so important, and now. She shook her head. Now I can't imagine risking what we have for something so insubstantial. I reached for her hand, a gesture that had once again become natural after months of awkward caution during our reconciliation. That's the thing about validation from others, it's always temporary. What we've built is sustainable. Kate smiled at my architectural metaphor. Ever the engineer, seeing relationships in terms of structural integrity. It's not inaccurate, I pointed out. We rebuilt from the foundation up, that's why it's holding. The structural analogy had become a touchstone in our reconciliation journey. Our first marriage had been like a beautiful building with fundamental flaws in the foundation, impressive on the surface but vulnerable to collapse. What we'd constructed since the affair was perhaps less conventionally perfect but engineered to last, with regular maintenance and attention to stress points. We should head in soon, Kate said, noting the deepening twilight. Amy and Tom will be here with the kids around 10 tomorrow. Our friend's weekend visit was another marker of our new normal. In the aftermath of the affair, many of our previous social connections had evaporated, some taking sides, others simply uncomfortable with the complexity of our situation. We'd gradually built new friendships, primarily with couples who knew us only as we were now, without the burden of our history coloring their perceptions. Inside the cabin, as we prepared for bed, I caught Kate watching me with a particular expression, part gratitude, part wonder. What is it? I asked, recognizing the look. Just thinking about everything it took to get here, she said softly. All the therapy sessions. The difficult conversations. The moments when it would have been easier to walk away. Worth it, though, I replied, meaning it completely. Absolutely worth it, she agreed, crossing the room to embrace me. Thank you for being willing to try, Alex. For seeing potential when you had every reason not to. These expressions of gratitude still emerged periodically, not as self-flagellation but as genuine appreciation for the choice we'd both made to rebuild rather than abandon. I'd learned to accept them for what they were, not apologies for a past we couldn't change, but acknowledgments of the present we'd chosen to create together. The next morning, we welcomed Amy and Tom and their 2 young children for a weekend of lakeside relaxation. As I taught their 7-year-old son how to bait a fishing hook while Kate helped their daughter make sand castles, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us here. The affair had been a breaking point, forcing both of us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our marriage. Kate had sought external validation rather than addressing her needs directly. I had prioritized professional achievement over genuine connection. We'd both been performing versions of marriage rather than authentically engaging in it. You're good with kids, Tom observed, joining me at the end of the dock while his son proudly displayed his technique to Kate nearby. Ever think about having your own? The question didn't trigger the pang it once might have. Kate and I had discussed children extensively during our reconciliation process, ultimately deciding against it. Not because we couldn't provide a loving home, but because we'd recognized we were content with our life as it was, focused on each other, our careers, and the friends who had become chosen family. We considered it, I replied honestly. But this works for us, being the cool aunt and uncle who borrow your kids for adventure days and then return them when they get cranky. Tom laughed. A wise arrangement. That evening, after our guests had retired to their rooms, Kate and I sat again on the deck, this time under a canopy of stars. The conversation with Tom had stirred thoughts about the paths not taken, the traditional progression we'd once assumed we'd follow versus the life we'd actually created. Any regrets? I asked Kate, curious about her perspective. About kids, I mean. She considered the question thoughtfully, as she did most things these days. Not regrets, exactly. Sometimes I wonder about it. But mostly I'm grateful for what we have, the freedom to build our life intentionally, without defaulting to expectations. Her answer resonated with my own feelings. The affair and its aftermath had forced us to question everything, to rebuild based on genuine desires rather than societal scripts. The result was a life that looked different from what we'd initially imagined but felt more authentically ours. I had a call with Granger yesterday, I mentioned, referring to my former employer from that transitional period after discovering the affair. They're expanding their sustainable housing initiative and wanted to know if I'd consult on some projects. That sounds interesting, Kate observed. Are you considering it? Maybe as a side project. The work aligns with my values, and it would be separate from my Wilson and Mark's responsibilities. I paused. What do you think? I think you should explore it if it excites you, she said simply. You've proven you can maintain boundaries. I trust your judgment. Those 3 words, I trust you, still carried special weight between us, acknowledged but not explicitly discussed. After the affair, trust had been the most damaged element of our relationship, requiring years of consistent action to rebuild. Now it existed as a quiet certainty, not the blind faith of our early marriage but something more resilient because it had been tested and deliberately reconstructed. The remainder of the weekend unfolded in pleasant domesticity, fishing with the kids, preparing meals together, evening board games with Amy and Tom. As we waved goodbye to our friends on Sunday afternoon, I felt a deep contentment that had become increasingly familiar over the past few years. "Good weekend," Kate said, slipping her arm around my waist as we watched their car disappear down the gravel road. "The best," I agreed, kissing the top of her head. Later, as we packed our own bags to return to the city, Kate paused while folding a sweater. "I've been thinking about our anniversary next month. 5 years since we started over, essentially. We'd chosen to celebrate the anniversary of our first date after reconciliation rather than our original wedding date, a symbolic acknowledgement that we'd built something new rather than simply repairing what existed before." "What about it?" I prompted when she didn't continue immediately. "I'd like to do something meaningful. Not just dinner and gifts, but something that honors the journey." She hesitated. "Maybe we could write each other letters about what we've learned, what we appreciate now that we couldn't see then." The suggestion was characteristic of the new Kate, thoughtful, focused on genuine connection rather than performative celebration. It struck me again how fundamentally we had both changed, not just in our relationship patterns but in our individual priorities and values. "I think that's a beautiful idea," I told her sincerely. On the drive back to our city apartment, as Kate dozed in the passenger seat, I reflected on the strange, painful path that had led us here. The discovery of her affair had felt like the end of everything, the ultimate betrayal, the irreparable fracture. For weeks afterward, I'd moved through life in a fog of hurt and anger, certain that nothing good could emerge from such destruction. Yet somehow, through consistent effort and painful honesty, we'd created a relationship that surpassed what we'd had before, deeper in understanding, more authentic in connection, stronger in its resilience. Not because of the affair, certainly, but because of how we'd chosen to respond to it once the initial crisis had passed. Kate had once said I was too busy for her, and found someone at work who wasn't. The irony was that now, with more demanding careers than ever, we made more time for each other than we had during those supposedly simpler years. The difference wasn't in our schedules but in our priorities, in the conscious choice to put connection first, even when it wasn't convenient. The following month, on the evening of our reconciliation anniversary, Kate and I sat in the small garden behind our apartment building, reading the letters we'd written to each other. Hers to me acknowledged the depth of pain her betrayal had caused and expressed profound gratitude for the second chance I'd given our relationship. Mine to her recognized the courage it had taken to do the difficult therapeutic work that made reconciliation possible, to face her patterns without defensive denial. "I never thought we'd get here," Kate admitted when we'd finished reading. "In those first weeks after you found out, when you moved out and wouldn't speak to me, I was certain it was over forever." "It almost was," I acknowledged. "If you hadn't done the work, real work, not just apologetic gestures, I don't think I could have found my way back to trust. And if you hadn't been willing to see potential beyond the betrayal, none of my work would have mattered," she added. We were both right. Rebuilding after infidelity requires genuine change from the person who betrayed the trust and extraordinary willingness to risk further hurt from the person who was betrayed. Either element alone is insufficient. Both must exist simultaneously for genuine reconciliation to occur. As we toasted our unconventional anniversary under the garden lights, I felt a profound appreciation for the difficult path we'd traveled. The affair had been the worst experience of our marriage, a devastating breach of trust that could easily have ended everything we'd built together. Yet through that painful crucible, we'd emerged with something authentic, resilient, and deeply satisfying. Kate had sought someone who wasn't too busy for her, looking outside our marriage for what was missing within it. The painful irony was that we had both been too busy, not just with work but with maintaining appearances, meeting expectations, performing roles we thought we should play rather than honestly expressing who we were and what we needed. Now, 5 years after the breaking point, we were busier than ever with meaningful work and relationships, yet more present for each other than we'd ever been during those supposedly simpler times. We'd learned the difficult truth that availability isn't measured in hours but in attention, in willingness to be fully present during the time we share. The affair would always be part of our history, a painful chapter neither of us could erase. But it no longer defined our relationship or determined our future. What defined us now was the conscious choice to build something authentic together, day by day, with full awareness of both the fragility and the strength of what we'd created. She had said I was too busy for her, and found someone at work who wasn't. The painful journey that followed had taught us both that true connection isn't about having more time, it's about being fully present in the time you have, honestly communicating needs and boundaries, and prioritizing relationship over appearance. It was a lesson we'd learned the hardest possible way. But having learned it, we were determined never to forget it, to maintain with conscious care the authentic connection we'd rebuilt from the ashes of what we'd carelessly allowed to burn.